my lovelies. Welcome back to the Geek Suite. I'm your host, the one and only Kidner Bean, and I just wanted to say hello again in person before we do another dive into our next episode of Dungeons and Dragons and Ice and Fire, where we're going to be covering the second part of our Sansa episodes. Alrighty, my lovelies, let's get into it.
Alrighty, my lovelies, as I mentioned, we're continuing our D&D 5e character series, Dungeons and Dragons and Ice and Fire, and today we're covering the Part 2 episode of our Sansa character. And again, just a big hello to all of our new viewers. Be sure to hit like and subscribe and ring the bell so you can stay up to date on all of our latest content. And once again, this includes a big spoiler warning for both the books and the show. So if you haven't finished either series yet, please be warned you may be spoiled. Alrighty, so now that everyone's had their spoiler warning, like I said, today we're going to be covering, again, the sad but lovely Sansa Stark. And, as I stated in the last episode, Show Sansa is a more difficult character to do one of these D&D sheets for, so we're going to be doing some reaching into one of the more extended areas of the D&D realm, but trying not to get too crazy with it because we do want to not veer too far into the fringes when we're doing this character building, lest the whole series I'm doing just fall completely apart. So, let's start off real easy with race. In the show, Sansa's human. Boom, bam, done. So there's no real difficulty figuring out this part. Now, her class is going to be more difficult to do, especially for the way she presents in the show, because she isn't really a fighter or a magic user, so that kind of leaves her difficult to place. Book Sansa was really easy to do because she was a bard. Everything around her revolved being songs, being called a little bird, using her words and charm to get things done. So, when it comes to Show Sansa, this is going to be where we start veering to the fringes, and we're going to look at the Dragonlance campaign's alternative base classes for their 3rd edition. And so, doing that, we're going to classify her as a noble. This is different from having a noble background, which any class can have in theory. As a class, the description of noble is as follows. Nobles are charismatic manipulators who leverage skills and connections to advance their goals. They are mechanically similar to rogues without the ability to sneak attack and can call in favors that they earn. So, looking at Sansa and her character arc, we see her slowly realize that she needs to use her charisma and her looks and her charm to manipulate people around her into keeping her alive during her time in King's Landing. This initially includes Cersei and Joffrey, and when she realizes that she can't charm them into caring for her, she turns to people like Lady Olenna and Marjorie and the Hound, whom she believes have power or otherwise influence on the people who are in charge of keeping her alive. In the Vale, she learns from the best. Littlefinger teaches her how to, quote-unquote, play the game, and we later see her use these skills when she returns to Winterfell, when she escapes Ramsay and returns to conquer her home, and again when she stands up for the North against Littlefinger, the White Walkers, and the Dragon Queen. For her background, this one's kind of obvious. Again, she was born and raised and treated, for the most part, as a lady and or princess of Westeros. So we're gonna double fist it with nobleness today, guys, which I guess makes sense considering how her story ends on screen. As far as alignment goes, Sansa is, or at least was, lawful good, which makes sense. She believed in honor and that good triumphs and that all the other BS that her family raised her with in Winterfell. This later comes back to bite her and several other members of the Stark and Tully families in the ass. Now, Show Sansa becomes more lawful neutral, and that's where she sort of ends up at the end of the show, given how much time she spends with people like Cersei and Littlefinger. And this is the best way she knew to survive without completely compromising her moral compass. She still leans more towards lawful than chaotic, unlike Daenerys, but she learns that she needs to be maybe more realistic with her views on life, as opposed to the idealistic way that the Starks have been in the past. In the Vale, we see this where she knows that Littlefinger is shady, but she continues to choose to align with him and his decisions, even though they may go against her better judgment. There are a few darker moments in the show, such as the whole Ramsay dog incident, and then the mock trial of Littlefinger that seem very unstark to people who watch the show and read the books. But some of these more darker moments for Sansa are likely the result of PTSD or were otherwise the result of other extreme conditions. And for the most part, she still remains within the parameters of lawful neutral. Hell, the fact that Littlefinger even gets a, quote-unquote trial is proof that she leans more lawful than chaotic. Now, looking at the information we've got so far, as a human double noble who is lawful neutral, we're going to select the following skills for her. The first and foremost is going to be deception. She has to repeatedly lie her ass off in order to stay alive throughout the course of the series. Perception, she quickly learns to read people and has to make life or death decisions several times a day as a Lannister hostage. Insight, she is still a friggin' savant at house loyalties and is able to rapidly adjust to volatile life at court. She's not as adept at it in the show as she is in the books, but it is still a skill that we do see come through on screen for her. And the last one we're going to pick is persuasion. Sansa's beauty and charm carry her quite a long way through the story, and she is able to survive and get out of King's Landing in a time when nobody should want to be within 50 yards of her. Alrighty, so now that we've gotten the basics like race, class, and alignment and such out of the way, let's see how these character skills break down. Now, we're going to be sort of blending D&D metrics to see where these various skills and abilities level out for Sansa. So instead of, let's say, rolling a bunch of d6s in order to determine where her skill sets are going to be, we're going to use examples that we see from the show in order to see where she would roll out for any given skill set. So again, just covering the basics, an average is usually about a 10, with 14 to 16 being on the high end and 18 and up being reserved for the supernaturally powerful. Now, in the show, Sansa is not a warg, so she doesn't appear that she's going to have any of these supernatural powered abilities like she did in the other episode with her book counterpart. And once again, we're going to be starting with strength. And for strength, we're going to put her in at a 10. We don't see any evidence that she's physically weak or weaker than the average person would be, but unlike Dany, who's petite, Sansa's rather tall. In the books, her height is repeatedly noted, and we do see this come through in the portrayal with Sophie Turner. We see that she towers over people and is more or less of the same height with Jon Snow, who's supposed to be somewhere around 6 feet tall. We also see in the books that she does take a fair amount of abuse, which again comes through on screen in her King's Landing story, where we see her being beaten and tormented at court by the Kingsguard and Joffrey. And we also have extra helpings of this with the unspeakable horrors that Ramsay inflicts on her. Now let's go ahead and move on to the next category, and we have dexterity. Much like in the books, we do see this line in the show come through from Lady Catelyn, where she says, "Sansa was a lady at 3. We see in her characterization that Sansa is beautiful and graceful. She's careful and cautious in her actions and words, mostly because she has to be once she leaves Winterfell. And so looking at that, we're going to give her a 12, higher than the average commoner. But she's no ninja like Wolverine, aka Arya. Moving on to Constitution, she's going to be average here. We noted that her strength is average for her world, even though she's taller than most girls her age. We see her taking numerous beatings at Joffrey's command and her extended torture at the hands of Ramsay, and we see that she's affected by them in a manner that we would expect someone of her build to see. She hides her pain and her emotions behind a mask of courtesy in King's Landing, but in Winterfell we get to see more of a behind-closed-doors version of Sansa, as most of her time after their wedding night she spends locked in her room. So we see that she's not supernaturally durable when we get to see her alone behind closed doors when we get her interactions with Theon. So for Constitution, she's going to get an average 10. God, Ramsay was such a prick. Let's move on just before I get all ugh about it. Okay, moving on, let's look at her intelligence and wisdom. Ugh, this one's going to be a tough one for me. Alright, we see as her arc progresses that she grows and learns from her experiences. Maybe not as fast as she should, despite the Hound's frequent warnings and covering for her, but
Please.
I'm a slow learner. It's true. But I learn.
Give me
she's not a master schemer like Tyrion or Tywin or Littlefinger, but by the end of the show she's able to take what she's learned from people like this and apply it to her life. So we'll leave her at a 9. A little slow, but not special ed. Talking about learning from experiences and listening to people like Littlefinger, let's move on to wisdom. She's wise enough to know that she has a lot to learn, and is wise enough to know that she can learn from people like Littlefinger and Tyrion and Tywin and Cersei. But she shouldn't necessarily trust any of these people. So that's pretty average considering she's a teenager. Okay, now we're down to our last section, charisma. And, once again, Sansa has a level of charisma that's very high on the show. She uses her beauty and charm and sad tears and sex appeal and blah blah blah, whatever Cersei told her, to charm people into helping her. And she builds her way back up from nothing. And the people who do help her don't always have a reason to. Let's look at who helps her first, the Hound. This is a man who's been burned, by society. He's essentially given up on life and relegated to living the role of quote-unquote monstrous Clegane. He's a miserable, mean old drunk with a penchant for violence. And he's really only interested in self-preservation, except with this connection he makes with Arya later on, and then somehow he feels a sense of duty to that. But Rory McCann really tries to bring Book Sandor to the screen, even though those show writers did everything they could to make him a meme. So we see on the show that Sandor has no reason to help or take any interest in Sansa. He's quote-unquote Joffrey's dog. But he does. He becomes almost obsessed. Or at least he does in the books. In the show, they really tone down the whole Sand thing, which is probably for the best because even though they aged Sansa up a couple of years, they aged the Hound up about 20. So the teenager, early 20s relationship, which was already creepy to begin with, would become much, much creepier had it gone the way that it does in the books. But he does repeatedly run into her during their time in King's Landing, and he lies to her for Joffrey at the lies for her to Joffrey at the tournament. He covers for her when he finds her wandering around when she should be in her room. And he gives her advice on how best to survive in King's Landing, even though it's not necessarily what she wants to hear. He even risks his own life to speak out against the king, publicly, in court during one of Sansa's beatings. And now, it's likely that nothing happened to him because Tyrion comes in and the queen finds out and everyone's really pissed. But had that not happened, he could have been given the death penalty. And he gets nothing from this. Sansa's not paying him, she's not sleeping with him, ew. And he more than once risks losing his livelihood for her. Why? Why does he feel drawn to her? And he's not the only one. And we see that almost immediately upon her arrival in King's Landing, she becomes noticed by Littlefinger. Now, we don't get this creepy exchange that we get in the books when she basically first arrives at the tournament, but Littlefinger does make himself known to her and feels the need to, chat her up at the King's Hand tournament, but luckily her dad's right there, giving him, dagger eyes. But we also see Littlefinger make several not so solely self-serving moves to help Sansa during her stay in King's Landing. And we also see his plot to remove her and hide her in the Vale does, for the most part, seem really to be only of benefit to him. Whereas in the difference between what his motives are in the books and the show, we see that in the show he just outright admits to being in love with Sansa and his dream of sitting on the Iron Throne with her by his side. Which is weird, because love at first sight to a 13-year-old is so wrong. Even for a creepy brothel owner. We also see Sansa's charm endear many people to her throughout her story, most of them men. Bronze Yohn Royce is loyal to her as the niece of Lysa Arryn, but then continues his loyalty and comes to fight in Winterfell for her more than once. Or, well, rather, he stays to keep fighting. He turns his back on the acting protector of the Vale, Littlefinger, at his trial for Sansa. When Jon is elected, or selected, I don't think you get elected to be king, unless you're the Pope. That's the only democratic monarchy that I can think of that exists. Anyways, when Jon's selected king in the north, he speaks out against Jon's policies when Sansa voices dissenting opinion. While she's described as beautiful, and she's repeatedly fantasizes about her life being a song, and it's important to remember that she is super young, a child for most of the series, barely an adult at the end of it. These are grown-ass men falling head over heels and doing favors, sometimes life-threatening favors in the case of Dantos, Littlefinger, and the Hound, for a child. She uses her lady's charm to bring herself from POW in the most hostile place in Westeros with the most volatile family in Westeros to Queen of the Dorks, that's me, to Queen in the North. And she did it without dragons.
I'll get that Arab pretty boy, and I'll do it with my shirt on.
So we'll give her a 15 for charisma.
And just want to pop back in here for a second so I can use my own charm and beauty to convince you to join our Patreon family. Patrons are who keep this channel alive. If you want to support this channel, check out the link in the section down below. Our patrons get exclusive content, which includes things like access to our Discord server, and things like being able to answer the polls which chose the character for this video. Our patrons also get early access to content, so you get to see our wonderful geekiness before anyone else. And for more information on that, again, check out our patron page in the description section down below.
Now, looking at things like armor, class, and initiative, and speed, they're not particularly important per se, but we're going to go ahead and fill them in anyway. As a human with no armor, her armor class is 10, average, initiative is 0, and unlike everyone else, Sansa doesn't seem to have one of these magic jetpacks that'll transport her across continents in a matter of minutes, so we're going to leave her speed at an average 30. And again, for the rest of this character sheet, we're really only going to stick to boxes that are most relevant for character comparison. So for instance, we'll fill in other proficiencies and languages with things like being politically savvy and sewing. For features and traits, as a noble is mechanically similar to a rogue, we're going to reference these features and see how they play out for Sansa. Now, it is mentioned that the nobles don't have the ability for sneak attack, but I'm going to go ahead and read it out because I do think that this is something that comes up in her characterization in the show. So for the rogues, they have sneak attack. Beginning at the first level, you know how to strike subtly and exploit a foe's distraction. Once per turn, you can deal an extra 1d6 damage to one creature that you hit with an attack if you have an advantage on the attack roll. The attack must use a finesse or ranged weapon. You don't need advantage on the attack roll if another enemy of the target is within 5 feet of it, that enemy isn't incapacitated, and you don't have disadvantage on the attack roll. The amount of extra damage increases as you gain levels in this class, as shown in the sneak attack column of a rogue table. Now, the reason I'm including it, even though the Dragonlance 3rd edition says that nobles are mechanically similar to rogues except for sneak attack, is because we see this exemplified in Littlefinger's trial.
You stand accused of murder. You stand accused of treason. How do you answer these charges? Lord Baelish.
Sansa exploits his distraction where he's trying to turn Sansa and Arya against each other, and then allows himself to be caught in a situation he can't escape from. It's not necessarily an attack with a finesse weapon, but Sansa uses finesse to kill Littlefinger via this mock trial. So I'm counting that as a sneak attack because it was very, very sneaky. He didn't see it coming. The next ability that we see for the rogue/noble class is cunning action. Starting at the 2nd level, your quick thinking and agility allow you to move and act quickly. You can take a bonus action on each of your turns in combat. This action can be used only to take the dash, disengage, or hide action. With Sansa, she learns this skill rather quickly and uses it repeatedly with Joffrey in King's Landing. 2 notable cases are when she saves Sir Dantos at the tournament and the Hound backs her up.
You can't!
What did you say? Did you say I can't?
I only meant it would be bad luck to kill a man on your name day.
What kind of stupid peasant superstition?
The girl is right. When a man serves on his name day, He reaps all year.
and at the Lysa murder investigation.
I'm sorry, Lord Baelish. I have to tell the truth. I'll tell you everything.
Please, Elaine, leave nothing out.
My name's not Elaine. It's Sansa Stark, eldest daughter of Lord Eddard Stark. Lord Royce, we met when you came to Winterfell. You were escorting your son Sir Waymar to the wall.
Sansa Stark? You tell lies right to my face, you little worm.
Lord Baelish has told many lies. All to protect me. Since my father was executed, I have been a hostage in King's Landing. A plaything for Joffrey to torture or Queen Cersei to torment. They beat me, they humiliated me, they married me to the imp. I had no friends in King's Landing. Except one. He saved me. Smuggled me away when he had the chance. He knew I'd be safe here in the Eyrie with my own blood, my Aunt Lysa. The Lannisters have friends everywhere, even the Vale. He made me swear not to tell anyone my true name.
Your secret is safe with us, my lady.
Your father grew up right here in these halls. We hunted together many times. He was a fine man.
Tell us what happened to your aunt, Sansa.
You knew her well, my lords, my lady. You knew she was a troubled woman. She always loved Lord Baelish. She told me herself. From the moment he arrived at the gates of Riverrun, a boy of 8, carrying everything he owned in a little sack. She confessed to me she never loved Lord Arryn. She did as her father commanded, as so many of us have. When the gods finally allowed her to be with Lord Baelish, she was so happy. For a time. My aunt was a jealous lady. She was terrified that Lord Baelish didn't love her anymore, that he would abandon her for a younger woman. And then, one day, she saw him kiss me.
Lady Sansa.
It was a peck on the cheek, Lord Royce, nothing more. Lord Baelish is my uncle now, in truth, by marriage. He's always been so kind to me. I was so happy to be here, to be free, all because of him. But my aunt turned on me. She cursed me, called me a whore, promised to throw me through the moon door. When Lord Baelish tried to calm her, she struck him. She said she didn't want to live anymore. She stood on the edge of that moon door. He tried to reason with her, promised her she was the only one he had ever loved. But she stepped through those doors and she was...
It's not your fault, sweet girl. It's not your fault.
She disengages the Vale's suspicion in Littlefinger by lying and surprising everyone. And with Joffrey, she again disengages a rather hostile situation and saves Sir Dantos' life. Our next skill we see for a rogue/noble is reliable talent. By the 11th level, you've refined your chosen skills until they approach perfection. Whenever you make an ability check that lets you add your proficiency bonus, you can treat a d20 roll of 9 or lower as a 10. So, we see this not so much in any single action, but we do see her skills as an effective leader come to fruition the longer she's in Winterfell. She's established herself and is acknowledged for her skills, to the point where people start to prefer her to Jon, and eventually select her as their queen. Alright, and now let's go ahead and look at her personality traits and see how these D&D breakdowns reflect on her character. So, One way we could describe Sansa is that she is cautious. A player who is cautious is always taking steps to make sure they are safe in combat. Cautious and cowardice can be mutually exclusive or come hand in hand depending on the character. Someone who is cautious may use different strategies to get out in the safest way possible, but may be weak to fear attacks. If you need a character who can solve problems in the most peaceful way possible, however, a cautious person is the way to go. We see this in her careful navigation of King's Landing court life as a hostage, how she handled her incognito status in the Vale, how she handled Littlefinger, Ramsay, and the delicate political climate in Winterfell after Jon left. And, like most of our characters we're going to cover in this series, Sansa is distinctive. This is when someone has a physical trait that sets them apart. So for Sansa, that's going to be her Tully looks, which are her red hair, her blue eyes, and her height, which give her away instantly. The next characteristic we see for Sansa is that she's polite. A character who is polite will try to be as well-spoken as possible, even if they don't like the person they're speaking to. They can be genuinely polite, or they may be using politeness to their advantage. And no matter what happens to her, Sansa always remembers her lady's courtesy. Even in her little back and forths with people like Tyrion, Ramsay, and Daenerys, she always makes sure to extend the professional courtesies when they are required. Her ideals, we're going to keep this simple. Show Sansa her ideals are home and family. She wants to protect her father and save him in King's Landing. In the Vale, she's initially happy to be with family and laments about never being able to turn to Winterfell. Once she retakes Winterfell, though, she and Arya focus on the importance of the Stark family and how to protect themselves and their home in the upcoming winter. For bonds, these are going to be people that she has relationships in the show, and that would be people like her siblings, Littlefinger, maybe Bronzion Royce, and the Hound more or less. And of course, her biggest flaw is going to be that she...
Please.
I'm a slow learner. It's true. But I learn.
Give me
Well, here you have it. Here is what the HBO rendition of Sansa Stark looks like spelled out on paper. And here's how they compare side by side. Thanks for sticking around to see how our little bird turned out. Be sure to hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, and stay tuned to see who will cover it next on this series.
Alrighty, my lovelies, that's all the time we have for today. Be sure to hit like and subscribe if you like this video. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our delicious Geek Suite content. And if you want to support this channel and like the things that we do, be sure to check out our Patreon page. The link will be in the description section down below. Our Patreons get exclusive content and early access to videos, and depending on which tier you sign up for, you will get access to our Discord server. Alright, once again, my lovelies, it was wonderful to see you, and I will see you guys next time. Mwah.